So could you speculate on what the difference is, what the difference would be with a cover crop after wheat with a much higher biomass?
So if we put a cover crop in after wheat, that means that the wheat's probably been harvested in, say, mid-August, and probably the manure's gone on just shortly after that, and the cover crop's gotten planted, let's say, by the third week of August. And so in that case, you'd have an additional, compared to what we did, you'd have an additional month of growing power, and you probably have more capacity to accumulate some nutrients and biomass in that cover crop. So it seems like a better strategy if the manure is to go on in August and the cover crop is going to grow more, that you might have more capacity to retain the nutrients. But I think that you still wouldn't want to over fertilize that cover crop. If I'd like to make a suggestion on that, I'd like to say that you put manure on actually to fertilize crops, not just put manure on to clean out the storage. So I think I'd like to suggest that folks would match the manure input after the wheat with the nutrients that they thought the cover crop might actually use.
Okay, thanks. Dale has a question. I'll let him ask you directly.
Yeah, very quickly. Yeah, sorry. Good presentation, Joann. Thank you. What I know of cattle manure, because it has such a high urease activity, the loss of nitrogen is very rapid within a few hours of the application. So it wouldn't surprise me that there wasn't much nitrogen response on cattle manure. That loss is quite rapid. So I don't know, have you had a chance to look at that since then, or any reviews on that?
Well, it's not just cattle manure. It's really any type of manure. I mean, if I think about chicken manure, let's look at poultry manure, for instance. The major nitrogen form in poultry manure is uric acid. So that's just a direct precursor. I mean, it goes through a few little steps there: uric acid to allotonin, and allotonin to something else, and then it goes to urea, and then it goes through regular urea hydrolysis. So that one breaks down really fast. And then on pig manure, I mean, what's it? It's mostly water. So you've got probably 2/3 of all the total nitrogen is ammonia directly when you apply it to the field. So I have a feeling like a lot of manures we might be underestimating, especially when there's not much bedding. And I feel like folks are using a little less bedding these days because it's an extra cost, increased cost of production. I feel like people had switched more to slurry systems, and they'd switched more to liquid systems, and they use less and less bedding. Even those guys that are doing pelletized poultry manure, there's really no bedding in there. So when there's no bedding and we're dealing directly with the excreta, we've got a material that's really readily degradable. And so that may be a change from what had happened in the previous times or longer ago, when perhaps more bedding was used with manure, making the manure that we're talking about these days just a bit different from your parents' or your grandparents' manure in terms of its ease of decomposition once it goes out in the field. And all manure, probably is pretty easily degradable, because the fact is that the liquid portion of it, which contains the urine, or is the precursors to urea, is mixing in with the undigested feed that has bacteria in it, and all those bacteria, those bacteria in feces, will produce the urease. So it'll break that stuff down very, very quickly indeed. I don't know if that answers your question, Dale, but anyways, just a few remarks.
No, great remarks that needed to be said out loud. So appreciate the comments. So.
All right, I have a couple more questions in the chat for you, Joann. The first one being, are you going to continue with this line of research and potentially apply manure at additional times throughout the year to see if the responses will improve?
Yeah, that's a really good idea. I hadn't thought of that experiment, but boy, that's a really good one that needs to be done. I'd like to do it. So yeah, if you're interested in do that type of research, or you've got some cooperating producers that would be interested to do it, because we do stuff on a really small plot scale. And I'm kind of convinced by it, but I like to also work on farms. I like to do things with operators that are doing it in a more practical sense. Anyway, you can reach out to me. Just go Google my name someplace, you'll find me. Tell me what you're interested in.
Perfect. Okay, and there's another one from Don Flayton. He says, great presentation, Joann. Can you or would you comment on the producers' obstacles that they would face if they were confined to spring or summer application of manure only?
Yeah, it's so tricky, isn't it, Don? Thanks for your comment. It's logistics, isn't it? I mean, it's just finding the time to get everything done. And these days, with fewer people available to help work on operations and maybe limitations in equipment and so on, it's very, very tricky. So I think that we have to be sensitive to that, and we have to try to cooperate with people to just see what can be done. But I'm encouraged by the possibility that some folks have adjusted their manure spreaders to make it a possibility to do some in-season applications. And if you can just keep the level of manure down in the storage during the growing season, because you've been able to go out in the field and put a little extra on, during the crop season, well, maybe that would help a little bit. Just give us a little bit more capacity, give us a little bit more flexibility.
Perfect. I have a couple more questions that are coming in here. So the first one being, what is the C to N ratio of the dry matter used, if bedding makes that much of a difference? And should C to N ratio be a factor when deciding on fall applications?
Well, the C to N ratio of the manure that we had in our study, I don't think it was very great. I don't remember precisely what it was, but it couldn't have been more than about 12. So it is a pretty decomposable material. Didn't have a lot of huge amounts of bedding in with it. For solid dairy cattle manure, I've seen somewhere between, C to N ratio of around 12 to maybe as high as 18, 15, 16, 17, 18. Now, according to everything that I know, higher C to N ratio should mean that the material degrades a little slower, but still, I'd be surprised if you could get more than a C to N ratio of about 20 on manure. Maybe with horse manure you could, because, well, it's not actually a function of putting the bedding in with the horses, but more a function of the horses playing with their food and tossing some of the straw down and trampling on it and just making their bed more comfortable. So we might see a higher C to N ratio of around 25 or so, 25 to 30 even, with horse manure. But with dairy manure, I wouldn't expect to see a very high C to N ratio, and thus I wouldn't expect the bedding to really interfere with the decomposition of that material.
Okay. The next question being, do you think that most of the N was lost through volatilization soon after spreading?
I like that question. That's one that we were always concerned about too, because as soon as you put the manure out in the field, actually even during the transfer from the holding tanks or the storage facility into the spreader, and then moving it out to the field and then putting it on and leaving it on the surface for any period of time, you will definitely get volatilization. Do we think we lost a lot through volatilization? We tried not to. We think, yeah, maybe 10% could have been lost, but we were incorporating it and we were mixing it in with the soil to about an 8-centimeter depth within, I would say, well, the manure was spread in the morning and the tillage was done in the afternoon. So it was within 4 hours. So I think our ammonia volatilization losses should have been pretty small.
Okay. The next question here is asking about if there's any research on manure and urease or nitrification inhibitors applied altogether and its impacts on N losses in the spring and uptake of nitrogen to the crop.
So would people kind of mix in urease inhibitors or nitrification inhibitors with manure? You could do. I mean, it's possible because those materials can be mixed in with fertilizer. Would you do it with manure though? I don't know. It'd be very tricky because it's hard to understand how you would mix it uniformly or easily with it. And also, as soon as you start buying urease or nitrification inhibitors and you start mixing them with something, you've added to the cost of production. So it's an extra cost. And would they be effective? I'm just not sure. I'm not aware of a lot of research on that particular topic because with manure, as it's seen by still, unfortunately, by some people as more of a waste than a resource, I just don't know that that research has been done to establish the value of putting money into something that a lot of people perceive as almost a nuisance or as a waste or as a something that you just have to get rid of, dispose of. Possibly if people saw more value in it, then that type of research could be very relevant. But I'm not aware of all the research that's been done on that particular topic.
Fantastic. Okay. Next question is.
Oh, okay. I just saw an answer.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that. Okay, good. Thank you for sharing because that's helpful for other people to know.
Okay, so the next question is late fall manure application considered safer in drier regions than in moist regions?
I'd like to get Don Flayton's opinion on that, and I think he's going to address that a little bit more. All I can talk about is what I know from Eastern Canada. And in Eastern Canada, our situation is that the nitrogen cycles go very quickly because of the moisture, the humid conditions. So we have to be quite cautious.
Okay, I'm sure Don will touch on some of that in his next presentation, or I will get him to comment on it after in the Q&A session. The last question I see here is, did you ever notice C to N ratio changes in manure applied to the field, which will help soil microbes to aid in mineralization next season?
Well, I think we all recognize and we realize that that the manure is, especially solid manure that's got bedding in with it, is not going to just have an effect on the nutrition of the crop this year, but it should have a longer term effect. And even in Quebec, in our calculations or our calculators that we use to calculate the nutrient value from manure, we give ourselves a credit for last year's solid manure spreading because we think there's still some residual nutrition left from that. So yes, I believe it sort of goes like this. If you have a solid manure, and as you have increased the C to N ratio in that manure, we will give you more of a credit in the following season. And that allows for the fact that that some of the nitrogen that was contained in the bedding will gradually be mineralized. And it also accounts for the fact that, well, that there's some sort of slowing down of microbial processes or some nutrients that got kind of retained in the microbial biomass that gradually releases with time due to the extra carbon substrates in that manure.
All right. Okay, so I think that's the last question that I have on the chat. If anyone else has a question, now is for Joann. Now is the time. I don't see any hands up. Just let me take a quick look. No, I don't see any hands up right now. So with that, I think we can let Joann go and I can start introducing the next speakers. And I'll get Nancy to throw up the QR code.
Thanks everybody for your interest and thanks for the great questions. Really, really enjoyed it. It was so much fun. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Joann. Really appreciate your talk. So Nancy has thrown up the QR code for the session for CEU credits. So I'm pretty sure that you have to have the app for it to work. We're just gonna do, while we wait, we have a little bit of time before we're supposed to start the second talk. So I just want to run a quick poll to get a better idea of where people are from that are on the call. Unfortunately, we were capped at our numbers of people logged on. So try not to log out because you might not get to log back in. We are recording the presentations now. Nancy recorded it, so we'll have that available after. So Nancy just launched the poll. So if you could answer it and give us an idea of where you're tuning in from, that'd be great. Okay. Nancy, I'm not sure if you want to share the results. Okay, there. So we actually have the majority of people on the call are from Manitoba and Saskatchewan, with some from Alberta and Ontario. So that's just a little bit of reference for Don and John for this talk, so that there are a lot of people on the call from the prairies.